answer your first question. I will try my best on the second. So if we go to the floor plan, you'll see that the chapels are kind of located here in the center of the building. So this does provide a corridor for people to kind of congregate and consolation, et cetera. So we anticipate the corridor not being used solely for staff, but for people that are attending service, et cetera. And I really couldn't say what happens in the arrangement room with any sort of educated guess, actually. But the architect is here and he is able to answer that question.
All right. At the moment, are there any further questions of staff? Commissioner Rockwell, do you have a question?
Yeah. Was there any discussion, I recall discussing at committee of the whole, trying to pull the building even a little bit closer to Penn, and I know that that requires variance, which is already being asked for. But was there a discussion of that after committee of the whole, and what was the outcome of those discussions, if yes?
We certainly had the conversation to bring the building again closer to. Ultimately, the applicant decided that due to the change in the elevation between the sidewalk level, and it is a little bit of a higher sidewalk, we're adjacent to the BRT station. It's a 9-inch curb instead of the normal city curb to allow for faster access. We actually met with Metro Transit to have some of those conversations, but because of that change in the grade, and then so it's about 3 feet higher up from the public sidewalk to the building, they wanted to allow for kind of a gradual separation of views, but still allow for those views in and out. And so in addition to the landscaping they have proposed, staff is recommending some additional ornamental trees along that side to kind of bring the scale a little bit more human scale and more pedestrian level.
Okay. Thank you.
Right. If there are no further questions of staff, I will open the public hearing at this time, and I'd like to ask the applicant to speak first. So please state your name and address for the record.
Sure. Thank you, council members. My name is David Witt with Mobilize Design Architecture. We're the design architects on the SD's Funeral Chapel, working in collaboration with Collaborative Design Group and any other folks. To kind of address the entrance situation, I would point out we went through extensive study and iterations and many concepts about various different locations for that entrance. It was not something made lightly. We'd study in depth with in conjunction with the staff looking at that. And we just felt, because once we got further along, we also were getting more information about the design and location of the BRT station. It became quite apparent to us there'd be quite a bit of conflict between where the entrance would be and the BRT station would be, as far as the likely that the entrance might be hidden by the BRT station, the kind of traffic conflicts between people coming to the funeral home and people waiting for the transit, and point out that the BRT station takes the full depth of the sidewalk for circulation and the station itself. So it had been quite a lot of extensive kind of hardscape to make an entrance work at that location. The applicant, or not the applicant, but yes, these funeral chapel folks who be operating this facility were concerned about having their entrance so close to the BRT station, as it might be a kind of attractive nuisance for people wanting to use their facilities. A cold day waiting inside if the funeral home happens to be open. So there's concerns about, from a management and standpoint, a practical standpoint for the funeral home folks. We were concerned about the grade change difference and be a need for a quite lengthy and extensive accessible ramp at that side, given our 3-foot grade change. And also just mainly, it mainly came about because of the conflict between the BRT station and what we wanted to do. We felt that also with traffic, say 90% of the funerals we covered typically would be handled by the parking lot. As these folks tells us, that would cover the most of it. Other times for a large funeral or visitation, they'd be parking in the parking lot across the street. They cross Penn and Plymouth, and we have the entrance on Plymouth feel quite close to that entrance. We also do have a canopy that extends out so you see the hand railings, you see the canopy sticking out, you see the signage. So we felt that would be enough to draw people to that location for the entrance. An arrangement room is where they make the arrangements with the person coming in who's just lost a loved one comes into the arrangement rooms. They decide on the type of service, casket, those types of things. It's where the grieving family first start to meet with the funeral director to plan the services. And there were, it was a difficult process with us trying to be in an urban environment and meeting some of the urban design principles that we want to meet, but being respectful of the grieving process that's also happening in this facility at the same time. There's people who are just lost loved ones. Do they want to be smack dab on the street where someone could interact and look into it? So we're trying to find a respectful distance between the street and the building that allowed, we wanted to have light. We want to have lots of light. It's a new concept in funeral home design that much more light. You won't see many funeral homes are usually no windows, but what's important from an urban design standpoint and kind of the uplifting spirit from this building to have a lot of light. So we had to balance those kind of principles of additional light and views with kind of respect for the privacy of the people in the grieving process they might be going through in that space. So that's kind of how we arrived at the Plymouth Avenue exit entrance, the doors, and some of the other elements of it. So anyone has questions for me, I would.
Yeah, are there any questions of the applicant? Commissioner Cron.
We did talk at committee of the whole how to make the edge along Penn a little more urban. I think decorative fencing was thrown out.
We also,
is there any fencing proposed?
There's not fencing, but we've increased a hard edge, like almost I think a foot concrete edging to really define that edge of the street. So a little more hard edge. Also, what we did is on the as we move towards the corner, we created a little more space between the curb and the where you'd be crossing the street to accommodate additional traffic at that point. So we tried to define that edge with a raised concrete edge that leads you, it goes down Penn, turns the corner, goes down Plymouth to where our front entrance is. So it helps define where that entrance is and helps define a little more edge. And we're also, I think staff's recommendation is for additional trees on that side, which also might reinforce the edge there too.
Clarifying question. This 12-inch concrete, it's basically a small retaining wall or
yes,
curb.
Correct.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
Right. We don't want it high enough to sit on, but it's definitely high enough to create an edge. And there's a, the separation between public and semi-private space.
Okay, any further questions of the applicant? If there are none, is there anyone else who would like to speak on this item? And seeing no one, I will close the public hearing. And commissioners, we have 6 applications before us related to this project. Are there any further questions, or would someone like to start us off with a motion? We have a motion and a second to approve items A through F. Commissioner Kronzer.
I have a comment based on why I pulled this. I know it's hard fitting program into urban areas. I fully respect the desires and the needs to provide safe space for families. There's no doubt that this building faces the parking lot and fronts the parking lot. It addresses the parking lot. The code requires a door to face the public street, and it does that. I think I'm fine with this entrance on Plymouth, although I think this building is really turning its back towards Penn Avenue, which is a little unfortunate because there's a lot of public infrastructure and funding going into Penn Avenue. The county, the city, Metro Transit, we're all focusing on Penn Avenue, and this entrance is off. I'm not sure what to do. It seems like an entrance on Plymouth is appropriate, although almost the entire length of this building along Penn is not going to see many eyes on the street. This gallery is a neat idea, but it's really not going to have a lot of people presence there. There's a bathroom and this family room. I just think, maybe it is what it is, and this is the best we can do. So I'm not going to make any conditions to the site plan unless others join him in my concern, but I don't think it's a bad project. I just think maybe could take one more step forward.
All right. Is there any further discussion on the motion? Hearing none, we have a motion and a second. Clerk, please call the roll.
Freeland.
Aye.
Sweezy. Aye. Slack.
Aye.
Rockwell.
Aye.
Magrino.
Aye.
Lipke-Pier.
Aye.
Franzer.
Aye.
Gagnon.
Aye.
Bender.
Aye.
9-0.
And that motion carries. That concludes our discussion on item 3. And our final item for discussion tonight is item 9. And Mr. Crandall is staff. Zoning code text amendment.
Good evening, commissioners. Before you is a proposed zoning code text amendment dealing with our regulations related to fraternities and sororities. This amendment was introduced by Councilmember Fry's office in the 3rd Ward, and it is in response to a increased interest and participation in Greek life on the University of Minnesota campus in particular, which is currently the only institutional campus in Minneapolis that has a Greek community. However, our staff recommendations are citywide and do not preclude the possibility that there may be Greek uses established at other educational institutions in Minneapolis. A little bit of background. This is some data that was provided by the Greek community at the University of Minnesota showing kind of the increase in interest and participation. In 2011, there were 6% of students participating in the Greek system. That jumped to 10% in 2016. 17% of undergrads joined a Greek group in 2015, so a marked increase there. This is some more graphic material showing sort of the trajectory of interest and participation. And then these are the specific changes that are being sought to the ways that we regulate fraternities and sororities currently today. The way that we do it now is that no fraternity or sorority, no new fraternity or sorority can be established on a zoning lot that did not previously contain that use. Additionally, there's a minimum lot area of 10,000 square feet and a bulk restriction limiting fraternities and sororities to 2.5 stories. And additionally, a limit of 32 maximum persons served by the facility. That limit also limits on-site services to only members of the fraternity or sorority. So changes being sought are to allow for uses to be established on zoning lots that did not previously contain that use, to remove that limit of 32 persons, to allow on-site services to be used by members and guests, and to revise the building bulk and minimum lot area requirements to be similar to those of a community residential facility, which would reduce the minimum lot area from 10,000 to 5,000 square feet, and to increase the maximum height to 4 stories. This is a map kind of just giving you some context of where the existing fraternities and sororities at the University of Minnesota are today. They're largely concentrated in the Dinkytown and immediately to the north of the East Bank campus there. And then, of course, we also have a historic district related to fraternities and sororities that is regulated through the HPC. So I think I will conclude my presentation there. If we have questions, I'm happy to answer those.
Commissioner Magrino.
Hi, thanks. It looks like we got rid of the changes to the geographic restriction.
Actually, we are proposing to maintain the geographic
Okay.
restriction, which is that new fraternities and sororities need to be located within 1/2 mile of the education facility that they're associated with.
Did we talked about it a little bit at committee of the whole, and did we sort of figure out, does that include just like any land owned by the University of Minnesota, or are we sort of drawing the line at university, or do we know?
We have a little more work to do probably in terms of how we would enforce that. I think given that the University of Minnesota in particular has a somewhat fluid boundary, I think the way that we likely would establish that with the University of Minnesota or any other educational institution is to use the boundary of the facility at the time it was established as a use. So in the case of the university, that would be its kind of original land grant boundary, which I don't have today to show you, but we would need to determine that exactly in order to enforce that rule.
Okay. Just curious.
Commissioner Rockwell.
Peter, can you, so we've got the maximum number of persons served not exceeding 32. What is, and the proposal is to eliminate that. What does persons served mean? Does that mean like people living in the facility?
I believe it means residents, yes.
Okay. So the effect of eliminating that is just to leave it to the building code.
Yes, that's right.
Cool. Do we have an idea of like what that translates to per, do you know what the building code is?
It would be a certain number of persons per room. I don't know the exact number offhand, but
Okay. So it's limited by the number of rooms, not by the square footage.
yeah.
Okay.
I think so.
Okay.
That's crazy, Sam.
Another building code issue.
Are there any further questions of staff? Hearing, Commissioner Lupe-Pierre.
Yeah, I just had a quick question. So did your slide say that 17% of undergrads are members of fraternity sororities at the U?
17%, I believe, of the incoming class in 2015.
Okay, that made it so I was like, really? There's like 4,900 Greeks in
Yeah.
Really? I was like kind of surprised, but okay. Super, just curious.
Okay. If there are no further questions of staff, I will open the public hearing on this item. And I think we have at least a couple people who would like to speak, so you can come to the microphone and state your name and address for the record.
Thank you. My name is Lynn Swan. I live at 5100 West 82nd. I recently moved, so I have to stop and think here. Minneapolis 55437. I have with me today one of our fraternity alums who's been active in this. He is not going to speak. I do have two collegians who will speak very briefly. The president of Pan Hellenic and the treasurer for Interfraternity Council. I want to thank you for the thoughtful conversation last month on this subject. And you really, those of you who were there, you really hit to the heart of the matter. And I think you were talking about the regulations that are currently in place are very rigid regulations in comparison to any other type of facility that might bear any resemblance to this. So thank you for recognizing that. Also, you hit on the notion that this really was an ordinance change based on the University of Minnesota. And of course, there are no other fraternities or sororities or fraternity or sorority houses in the city of Minneapolis right now, which is in your written material. But looking to the future, the idea was let's use terminology that could apply across the city, meaning don't change what's in there right now. And we're happy as can be about that. That works out extremely well. These fraternity and sorority houses are not part of the University of Minnesota. They are independently owned. They are owned by the house corporations for each of the individual sororities and fraternities. Some of them have been around for over 100 years, meaning the property has been owned by the same entity for over 100 years. You don't find that very often. There is a whole layer of oversight that is responsible for each of these buildings. And of course, it starts with the city of Minneapolis, the state, the University of Minnesota, at least in terms of what happens there. But Each of these fraternities and sororities has their own house corporation. They have their own officers in the sorority and fraternity. They are part of a larger organization on campus. They each are part of a national organization, all of which has oversight. And the national fraternities have a national organization, and the national sororities have a national sorority organization. So the university is very supportive, first of all, of this idea of the growth. And in fact, President Kaler asked when he came, he said, what percentage are the Greeks at the University of Minnesota and where do they rank in the Big Ten? And he was told, you saw the number there, it was 6%. What I don't think you saw was we were last in the Big Ten, which was not an acceptable answer to him. And so a strategic task force was established in 2012 to say, what are the barriers to this growth? So the university looks at this community, the Greek community, as one that has a great deal of benefit to the University of Minnesota. And with that, I'd like to turn over briefly to our other two collegians who have just a moment of thoughtful words for you.
All right, thank you. And please state your name and address.
Hi, so I'm Molly Haig, and I live at 915 University Avenue Southeast in my chapter house, Alpha Chi Omega. So like Lynn said, I'm the president of the Panhellenic Council, which means I'm the president of all the sororities that have houses on campus, as well as a few other sororities that don't have houses right now, mainly because of this ordinance that's in place. So I just wanted to speak to the explosive growth that we've seen over the last couple of years. So I actually have the new numbers from this spring. And so the Interfraternity Council just surpassed 1,800, and the Panhellenic Council is at 1,784 members. So even in the last couple months, we've seen some growth, and both councils have multiple chapters, national chapters, knocking on our doors, wanting to come to campus, but we don't really have anywhere for them to go. Obviously, with 17% of freshmen wanting to go through recruitment or joining chapters after going through recruitment, we're growing immensely. So we just would love somewhere to put these chapters so we can continue to see our Greek community be successful.
Great, thank you. Okay, is there anyone else who would like to speak on this item? Seeing no one, I will close the public hearing. And,
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for being here. Commissioners, we just have the one item before us, the zoning code text amendment. Would someone like to make a motion?
Standards for fraternities and sororities.
All right, we have a motion and a second to approve the text amendment. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Bender.
Aye.
Gagnon.
Aye.
Franzer.
Aye.
Lipke-Peer.
Aye.
Negrino.
Aye.
Rockwell.
Aye.
Slack.
Aye.
Sweezy. Aye. Freeland.
Aye.
9-0.
All right, and that motion carries. That concludes our discussion on item 9 and also concludes our meeting for today. We have committee of the whole this Thursday. Our next meeting is March 20th, and we are adjourned.